Hello, hello, hello. It is Monday, so it is Helen's focus for the week time already. And how many weeks are there left to the end of the year? Not too many. I think it's only a bit over, is it 6 or something? Which can be scary or can actually be quite fine, depending on how you view it. Hello, Kay, and is that you, Nat? I think. I can't even see all the time when it's the small faces, even with the glasses, but there you go. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about, and welcome, thanks for joining, was how some creatives and spirituals can actually, hello Letitia, lovely to see you, be late as I was tonight, rather than being 7:30, being a few minutes late, and why that might be so, and why that actually, in my opinion, isn't necessarily a bad thing, that it's actually okay. And I want to start off, hi Kay, hi Letitia. I want to start off by saying I don't mean to suggest that all creatives and definitely not all spirituals are late or messy, because I want to talk about that as well. And it is not meant to be a judgment at all. It is not meant to be, because I actually admit to running late, as I have been with starting the video tonight. And also, I'm not the most tidiest person. And that's why I'm a productivity rebel, because whilst I believe in the principles that a lot of other productivity coaches, mentors out there believe in and talk about. The difference, though, is that because I'm so interested in people who are creative and spiritual, and how our minds think differently, and I think we've got our own set of rules. But having said that, I am aware that we need to work within a larger group, whether it's a family system or maybe you've got a team that you're working with in your business, and of course the wider community. So we need to sort of have that bit of a balance. But I wanted to really, I'm often late and I'm messy too. Good on you. And look, there's no bad or good, as I say, no judgment, whether it's, really great or whether it's really awful. The thing is that I know, and I want to tell you a little bit about what it's been like for me. I grew up what I thought was very left brain, so very the logical, the linear, and that's why I was so into productivity, and I still am for sure, and had a corporate career in project management, quality improvement, that sort of thing. You might have heard me say that before another time. But what I found was that something was missing, and I spent ages beating myself up about the fact that I wasn't always on time. Now, I'd like to think that most of the time when it was like important work meetings and all that, I was. But sometimes appointments or meeting up with people, and it's not that I wanted to be rude, it wasn't deliberate. But this is the thing that I found, and I'm wondering if this is the case for those of you watching either live or the replay. Maybe you can relate to this, in that I was in my own thoughts, involved in the flow in something. And so time, I don't think, in a way, doesn't mean the same for those of us who are what I call right-brained, as in creative and spiritual, because we don't tend to think as much in that linear way. And I would say that I definitely have both left brain and right brain tendencies, and you may well find that that's the case for yourselves as well. I see it as being on a continuum. You've probably heard me say this before. I think there are some of us who are very logical, very linear, go from A to B to C to D, and, couldn't bear to go G to B to X to M or something like that, which is what traditionally, or a lot of the time, right brainers would tend to do. Those of us creative spiritual who think spatially, not in a linear line as such. So I realised, as I said, I was beating myself up big time, and I actually realised I was quite different in that respect to other people that I worked with in corporate, and that's why I just yearned for much more flexibility and more of the intuition and all that sort of thing that is characterised by the right brain. So it'll be interesting. Let me know if you think that you are one end of the continuum or not. And as I said, there's no judgment, but some of the reasons that we may be, let's start off with talking about being late when we are particularly creative and spiritual, particularly intuitive, as I said, is that we can be in our minds. So if we are in a creative flow, whatever that is, whatever form that takes, it might be that you're in the middle of cooking something that you don't want to be stopping. You're at a point where you can't stop, or you're writing, or if you are an artist in whatever shape or form, you're in that creative phase. If we're in the flow, it is so hard to stop. And if you know what I mean by flow, there's that real momentum. You're in your zone, I think is another way to put it. And time really doesn't matter because we actually go almost against time. It's immaterial in that way. And if you are at all familiar with, and I've talked before about The Big Leap with Gay Hendricks, the book, and he talks about Newtonian time and Einstein time. When we're in our creative flow, that's the more Einstein time. And you may have heard of, I don't know if you have, I've mentioned her a little bit before, Marnie Makrodakis, who is an American author, Creating Time. I've forgotten the subtitle for that book, but she talks about it in terms of Chronos time, which is the same as the Newtonian time, which is our chronos, of course, coming from the root word of chronological, and that's what our times are, our clocks are based on. As opposed to Kairos time, which is a Greek word, and that's spelled Kairos, and that's the Newtonian time. Of course, that relates to Albert Einstein, which means that time is what we make of it, and we can expand it, we can contract it, and it is not this linear 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour type thing. So when we are particularly creative, and in that creative flow, or an intuitive state, maybe if you relate to being quite spiritual, you're involved in some activity around that. And what happens quite often, I think, then, is that as I said, we're not in the same definition of time as those people who are much more the left brain and looking at time in its usual form, being, watching the clock sort of thing. So that is often the case. And as I said, I used to beat myself up, but I know now, and I don't do it, I don't beat myself up now. I know that it's so hard for me to stop when I'm in the middle of the flow. So I will either, if I know I've got an appointment I've got to get to, I either have to not start something that I'm likely to get into the flow with, or actually, if depending on the situation, of course, put back the time for the appointment. I'm more aware of the way that my tendencies are in terms of being in this flow state. So I actually plan those to be times when I don't have other appointments that I have to attend to. That's probably the biggest thing that I've learnt. And as I said, this this realisation that it's actually okay. I don't have to beat myself up and apologise. And I mean, I certainly don't want to be rude to other people. I don't want to be leaving people waiting. But my sort of philosophy now is, well, it's not intentional, and for me, I mean, it depends on the situation and the person. If they're a little bit more like me, I think it can be a little bit more fluid, and that probably makes it easier. So I might be a bit more flexible with my time there, as opposed to, say, an appointment where, you've got a service that you're attending and you need to be there right on time. So as I said, the trick for me is definitely planning I've talked before about my focus sessions where I can really be in the flow, as opposed to doing something that you're not entering that flow state and you are doing something that won't take so long, and so you're not getting as deep into it, so it's easier and quicker to be able to get out of that, if that makes sense. So that's definitely one of the reasons. And another reason in terms of, well, I think that's probably the main reason. Oh, actually, what I will say, and this relates to then about clutter or mess, and that is that when we are particularly creative, and who knows, maybe spiritual as well, we actually don't want to conform. Now, again, like I've been saying, it's probably on the continuum. There will be some of us that really, really are rebels and don't want to be hemmed in by rules and obligations very much at all. Some of us might be okay with some of them some of the time. But I think when we're particularly creative and intuitive by nature, we actually are probably governed more or directed more by our own intuition. By our own, I want to say urges, creative urges, and that's a. I say that, you know, in a positive, like that's a positive thing to say. That doesn't necessarily meet convention, and I've said this before. Unfortunately, hopefully it'll change. Unfortunately, we are governed in a left brain world. We are, we have, and this is why a lot of us, I think, have gone into our own businesses as well. If we do the usual 9 to 5 job, there's all these rules and regulations and start times and finish times and all that sort of thing. And so by our very nature, we actually often don't like that. We can feel really hemmed in. And so that's another reason that we can be late. And it's also a reason why we can actually, and again, it's a continuum, but we can actually find that we're okay with a certain amount of mess. That there isn't necessarily this need to have everything pristine clean. And this was also something that I battled with, particularly when I was really interested in productivity. And I sort of thought, well, you know, if I'm a productivity coach, I've surely got to not have any mess, and that's when my perfectionism reared its ugly head, and you know, thought, well, how can I work with people around clutter if I have a bit of a mess myself and all that sort of stuff? And I realised, and this is part of why I love working with creatives and spirituals, is that they actually may not find that their mess is an issue. And I've actually done some reading recently, which I think is fascinating, that talks mostly about a messy desk. So we're probably talking more a work situation, that people like Einstein had a really messy desk. And so did even people like Steve Jobs. I think it was Mark Twain as a writer. So really creative types can often be okay with mess. Whereas for somebody else who maybe is not necessarily really creative and perhaps is more conventional, that could actually be a real form of stress. And any mess or a small degree of mess can actually add to the issues that they might have around productivity. But when we think about creatives and spirituals, that may not be the case. In fact, if they have a little bit of mess, a messy desk, it can actually stimulate their creativity because they're seeing the things that are not in their right places, but that means that it's in a different form. And that can stimulate ideas where, you know, we're not seeing everything in its usual place. And it may, just having it in a different place can and noticing that difference can mean that we can come up with different ideas. We're putting different things together in our minds. It may not even be on a conscious level. And I think that's really, really fascinating. So with some of the reading that I've done, seeing some of these famous people's desks, it's like, oh my God, that's mine isn't as bad as that. But I just think it's a really, really interesting concept. And also, it means that we actually can get into our flow better as well if we actually have that creativity sparked by having a messy desk. So the way, and I think this is the take-home message, the way that we view being late or messy, inverted commas, again, no judgment, but you know what I mean, not having everything in its right place, etc., is such a really interesting thing to think about in terms of the way that we respond to it, in terms of whether we are on the creative and spiritual, the intuitive side, and versus, as I said, the more conventional, more organised, inverted commas, left brain sort of types. The thing, though, I will say, though, is I do think that if there is so much clutter, and I think there's such a difference in the wording, the language around mess and clutter. I think if there is a lot of clutter, even us and those who are really, really highly creative will probably find that there's some sort of level, a threshold of when it gets crossed into that more that clutter realm, that it can actually start to be dysfunctional or starting to hinder our productivity. So I think that there's very much, and in which case then I think that getting some support in regards to that can really help, and particularly those where clutter is quite severe and it can be quite chronic. So I think the thing then is to really, I'm such a believer in us reflecting on our own behaviour and understanding it better. And so if you haven't done this as yet, I really invite you to consider how you are with regards to these behaviours around keeping to time or not, and then how messy things are for you on a usual basis, or whether, as I said, it moves over into more clutter. And deciding if it gets to a point where you then think, right, that's it, I think I probably should be making some changes here in terms of my behaviour. If your lateness is chronic and it's causing problems, maybe with the people that are depending on you to be more on time, or some other sort of consequences, then you might want to change that as well. And as I said, with the clutter, understanding that there needs to be this balance. Hi, Carol. Lovely to see you. This balance between the creativity and the freedom and the flow that comes with that. And I believe that if we are really highly intuitive, that's the case as well, because we want to go with the flow, we want to be spontaneous. So there's that on one side, but then you want to be balancing it with still being productive. So I think that those of us who are creative and intuitive can't bear to just have the rules and the regulations and the feeling almost confined and perhaps even strangled by too much structure and all that sort of thing. And that's why I love talking about how things are different for those of us who are creative and particularly are highly spiritual. But it is that balance then, as I said, with ensuring that you actually have enough productivity to keep going, to not be hindered by that, to feel that you're making progress in the work that you're doing, the projects, perhaps things that you're doing at home and that sort of thing. So I invite you to have a think about where you are on this continuum with regards to your time, how you manage your time generally, but particularly we're talking about whether you're late or not, and also then around mess. And it's interesting because then it makes me think, well, how do we communicate this with others around us, maybe people you live with, people you work with, perhaps communicating with them that this is the way that you are. It's not right or wrong, but you might be different from the other people. And having that understanding, and I think in a way that respect that we don't all think the same way, we don't all work the same way. And hopefully allowing a little bit of fluidity and acceptance of what each other, or within a group, what everyone's preferences are. So I will leave that with you. With that, as usual, any comments or questions, please put them in the comments below. If you would like any support with regards to if you do feel that you're crossing over into that bit of lateness, it's starting to actually impact things in your business or in your family life, do let me know. I would be more than happy to support you with regards to that. Or as I said, if the messiness is starting to move over into the clutter a bit, too much for when you think about it, for your productivity. So would love to support you, as I said, with that. And let me know in regards to Facebook Lives, what would you like me to cover in regards to productivity, being creative and spiritual and productive at the same time. Any particular topics, please put them in the comments below, or put it in a separate post, or indeed message me. I would love to be able to hear more ideas so that I can obviously talk about things that really interest you. So with that, I will say thank you so much for watching, and look forward to seeing you throughout the week. Bye for now.